Endurance would never make it to the shore of Antarctica. But in a way, the shore of Antarctica made it to Endurance.
We made many interesting geological and scientific discoveries and had many narrow escapes throughout the whole time. Having done a work that has resulted in great advantage to science, and for the first time returning without the loss of a single human life. And throughout all this, I was helped by a party of men who were regardless of themselves and only thinking of the good of the expedition.
Hey, welcome to all of you, bandits and chilies. This episode is called Shackleton Series Part 1, Stowaway Perce. I made the mistake of looking into Ernest Shackleton as an example to make one little side point in an episode, and, well, I fell into the rabbit hole. His story is just so incredible. So I'm going to turn this into a 3-part series, and to keep it interesting and relevant and fresh if you are, already really familiar with the story of Ernest Shackleton and the Endurance and Aurora and all of that, I'm going to format these episodes as follows. They will have a custom intro and outro, as you just heard. In that intro is the actual real voice of Ernest Shackleton. Same with the outro. I just think it's insanely cool that there is actual preserved audio of Ernest Shackleton. Anyway, then I'm going to tell the story. It's a great story. There's really no way to get it wrong. But I've also tried to not only be extremely accurate, but also to pick out the parts that are extremely interesting, to me at least. So hopefully some of them are new to you as well as they were to me. Lastly, at the end of each episode, I'm going to make a couple of comments about really cool bits that can apply in your business and so forth. But honestly, that's almost entirely not necessary, so I'm going to keep it really short. This story makes its own introductions and applications when it comes to leadership and mindset and resilience and hope and striving and risk-taking and a great many other things that I know you as a family-oriented business grower will be interested in. So let's get into it. Firstly, when I started looking into this story, there was much about it that I did not know, and I'm sure that there still is. But one thing that I thought I did know about it was actually a myth. I'm sure you've heard of Ernest Shackleton's famous job ad posted in a paper and drawing in 5,000 respondents. Men wanted for hazardous journey, low wages, bitter cold, long hours of complete darkness, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in event of success. It seems unlikely that this ad ever existed. The first reference made to it was over 40 years later, and no original copies of this ad from newspapers at the time has ever been found. But even without such a compelling job ad, Shackleton was not short of interest, and the sentiment of that ad that never existed was still spot on. In fact, the 5,000 applicants part of that story seems to be true. Amongst those applicants was one Percy Blackborough. He was so keen to join the expedition that he snuck on board Endurance as a stowaway after being initially rejected as he was only 18 and had minimal experience. Imagine how thick in the air the spirit of adventure must have been to prompt this 18-year-old to sneak aboard this ship to an unconquered frontier. This would be like sneaking aboard a mission to Mars or the Mariana Trench. We live in a world with both less and less unconquered frontiers, as well as more and more unconquered frontiers. Anyway, Percy was Welsh, and he applied for the expedition whilst in the UK. Once he was rejected though, he couldn't just hop on board the ship as it left London. He would have been discovered before the crew was committed to their journey to Antarctica. They were set to stop in Buenos Aires for a couple of months before heading on to a remote settlement in South Georgia. Percy was young, he didn't have money, and he wasn't well connected. Still, his determination outweighed his resources and his planning. He signed on as crew on a merchant ship heading from Europe to South America so that he could work his way to his destination. He made that journey with a friend named William Bakewell, who had been accepted onto the crew of Endurance. Then, when the final preparations were being made for Endurance's departure from Buenos Aires, Percy lingered around the docks and helped out informally before taking his chance and sneaking on board the ship. He hid in a locker for a couple of days before being discovered, and at that point, They couldn't just drop him off at the next port. Perce brought the total number of the crew from a planned 28 up to 29. Ernest Shackleton told the boy that he could stay, but warned him jokingly that, as the stowaway, he'd be the first to be eaten if food ran short. How much of a joke that was very nearly put to the test on their grueling journey. They arrived at a whaling station in South Georgia on November 5th, 1914, and they stayed there for a month. The plan had been to time their voyage to Antarctica with the longest light and the lightest ice of summer. But the Norwegian whalers at the station warned them that this season was unusually severe. Shackleton, though, was an explorer, a visionary, a dreamer. He and his crew had sailed for a couple of months to reach the cusp of this expedition. They had their support team approaching Antarctica from the other side, having set off from Tasmania aboard Aurora. If they were to pull out due to a severe weather warning, they had no way of knowing if they would ever be able to take another chance. At the very least, it would be another year that they would need to wait for another window of opportunity in the summer in order for them to enter the Weddell Sea that currently lay right in front of them. Likely, it would take even longer than that. And also, think of the timing. Shackleton had had a telegram correspondence with the First Lord of the Admiralty, that is to say the political head of the Royal Navy, regarding whether the expedition should continue in light of the beginnings of the Great War. This was on August 3rd, 1914, and the First Lord of the Admiralty at the time happened to be Winston Churchill. Shackleton had offered the use of his crew for the war effort, asking if possible that they be kept together and suggesting that they would have sufficient experience to man a destroyer. Winston Churchill replied with a single-word telegram. The expedition was to proceed. At midnight that night, England made a formal declaration of war. So here they were, 3 months later, having arrived at South Georgia and being given a bad weather report by the Norwegian whalers. It wasn't in their character and it wasn't in their mandate to call off the expedition. The crew of Aurora were thousands of nautical miles away, and neither ship had a radio capable of communicating across that distance. A letter sent would have a delay of months even with ideal weather conditions. So the Aurora crew were committed to their mission regardless of whether the Endurance proceeded. Aurora's crew were risking their lives too in support of the better-known Endurance. So with all of those factors, a little bad weather wasn't going to stop Ernest Shackleton. Not even a lot of bad weather. After they left from the whaling station in South Georgia on December 5th, 1914, that was their last contact with the outside world for 18 months. And their last contact with dry land for 497 days. After that departure on December 5th, it was only 2 days later on December 7th that they first entered the trap that would prove to be their downfall. As Endurance sailed its planned route through the Weddell Sea, it entered a world of pack ice, a vast, drifting labyrinth of frozen plates ranging from the size of an IKEA chair all the way to the size of an IKEA. Huge, loose sheets of ice. Endurance would never make it to the shore of Antarctica. But in a way, the shore of Antarctica made it to Endurance. As they sailed, these massive floating islands of ice would crash into them, putting pressure on the hull of the ship and knocking men off their feet with the impact. It wasn't as though they had no idea about pack ice. It was always an anticipated obstacle. The plan was to reach the coast of Vassel Bay by maneuvering through the pack ice, and as it drifted, it would open up pathways towards the shore, simultaneously blocking their pathway out. But even though it was in the middle of summer, this particular summer, the summer of 1914-1915, was not the season for this expedition to succeed. On January 18th of 1915, Endurance was frozen into heavy pack ice from all sides, roughly a full day's sail from their intended landfall. That is an expression at this point, kind of like "as the crow flies," because they would neither be flying nor sailing. They were now simply a part of the drift, in the clutches and at the mercy of the Weddell Sea. On February 22nd, they reached their furthest south position, But now the drift was shifting direction and began to take them north. Summer was ending and their ship was locked in the ice. They would have expected, they would have hoped, they would have prayed that the summer would afford enough heat to break up the pack ice around them and set them free. But as the days had shortened from nearly 24-hour sunlight to now approaching equinox, the severity of their entrapment sunk in. They would have to overwinter with their ship, not even having reached land. In a perfect world, Endurance would have reached Vassal Bay in late December of 1914, giving Shackleton and his men 4 or 5 months to cross the continent before the Antarctic winter. But when they were trapped in pack ice by mid-January, even if Endurance had freed itself, the window for a successful crossing had already narrowed to near zero. Now, in late February, as they were drifting north, the fact that they couldn't attempt their crossing meant that even though the pack ice would soon likely be stable enough for them to sled across towards the shore, there was nowhere to go. Their best chance of survival lay within the relative safety and shelter of their ship. Their situation remained in a sort of unfathomable stasis for the next 8 months. March brought the autumn equinox. Thereafter, each week, they lost roughly 1 hour of daylight. April got darker and colder. By the start of May, the sun would barely reach over the horizon at them. They would experience night and twilight. June 21st, the winter solstice. They no doubt saw the aurora australis, the southern lights. It would have been unimaginably otherworldly to have been so completely isolated. In the modern world, it is almost impossible to be in a situation like this. They would have had better weather reports. They could have made better decisions in advance. If they did need to call it off at the last minute, Shackleton would have just sent McIntosh, the commander of Aurora, a gift that said, "Nope." But they were operating with such limited equipment, such limited information, and now as the months wore on and the sun began to creep back over the horizon in late July, it would have brought with it that sense that the worst was over. The days were getting longer. The grip of winter would loosen. During their stasis, Shackleton made sure to keep the men's spirits up as much as he could. He encouraged games and jokes, insisted upon order, routines, and cleanliness, which maintained a sense of purpose, structure, and hope. He ran the ship, even though the ship wasn't going anywhere. But everyone on board still had their responsibilities. They had boxing matches, they played soccer on the ice, they raced their dogs, they made mini sledging and scouting expeditions on the pack ice, and opportunistically hunted seals and penguins. Their dogs had puppies, and each dog had been given an assigned name based on where it was donated to the expedition from, mostly various schools in the UK. But then the men were able to name the puppies, and each dog was assigned to a carer. They staged plays and performances, improvised and acted, played music and sang. Shackleton made it a point to know each of his crew personally, and he would check in on their moods, their fears, and their disputes. He frequently told stories and joked with the crew to maintain a light-hearted tone even amidst the backdrop of seemingly endless voids surrounding their ship. They may as well have been in deep space. Shackleton led by example, shared duties, ate last, and endured discomfort with his men. His discipline was firm but fair, and he maintained optimism without falsehood. He always reassured his crew that this was survivable, but he didn't paint a rosy picture that wasn't moored in reality. Their ship was their prison, and yet it was also their only haven. So morale was as critical as food. We will leave part 1 of the story here in early October of 1915. Shackleton's ship was stuck in the ice, motionless for 8 months, or at least lacking intentional motion that was within his control. Yet he never let his crew slip into despair. He gave them purpose, routines, laughter, and hope when there was no progress to show for their effort. In business and in family and in life, we all hit frozen seasons where forward motion feels impossible. Sometimes things just slow down. Sometimes, even though it is summer, it isn't the summer, and it just isn't your season to make the progress that you thought you were about to make. In those seasons, leadership isn't just about pushing forward regardless, it's about holding the team together, holding your family together, and holding yourself together when conditions are against you. Shackleton demonstrated that morale, discipline, and shared purpose can keep people alive when resources are scarce and the future is uncertain. Maybe there's some uncertainty amongst your kids because of a move, and ensuring that you anchor to a specific structure and routine can help them to adjust. Maybe within your business, there is a season when you question, is this even worth it? And maybe you can get through that season and see the sun rise above the horizon again by treating the little things as important along the way and still running the ship even when it is trapped in the ice. As an entrepreneur, have you ever committed to something so heavily that it didn't matter that the ice was closing in behind you? You just needed to find a path forward and to make it work? Have you ever been told no, but then just snuck aboard anyway, like Perce Blackborough? What I love about his story is that if this was a conscripted expedition, most people would have been trying to sneak off the ship, but he so desperately wanted to get in on the action. It can feel a bit like that running a business too, in that it involves a higher degree of commitment and risk than most people are willing to take on, or they prefer the apparent security of their 9 to 5. Not you though. It doesn't matter if other people told you that you were too young or too inexperienced, or it was too risky, or whatever else they said. Right now, you've found yourself on the entrepreneurship. See what I did there? Entrepreneurship? Yeah, look. Alright, check out the brand new Freedom and Profit Quest that I have just launched. The link is in the description. The page is themed around coffees, krakens, big dreams, and little changes. So the URL is warplan.au/coffees and krakens. Check it out. That's it. Have an awesome day. Make someone else's day awesome. I love you just the appropriate amount, like take whatever is weird and then take a healthy step backwards from that line. That's exactly how much. If it's weird, you're the weirdo. Catch ya. Bye. Hey, if you enjoyed this, check out the brand new Freedom and Profit Quest and get your own customized map from where you are to where your business is going. Chart your course at warplan.au/coffees and krakens. Link in the description.
After this, we 4 men had 1,000 pounds to pull, and we were unable to pull the whole load at once, so we had to relay. That is, we hauled half our load for a mile, then we walked back a mile, and then we hauled the other half up. So for every mile we gained to the south, we had to cover 3 to do it.